exPLAINed on me.
Hey everyone, we're back for episode 2. Today it's just me, Krista, and Miranda. And today we're going to be talking about what church was like for us as Mennonites. We're just going to kind of go through what the service was like and some unique things about going to a Mennonite church. So we're going to start out by talking about what we wore. So basically, if you're a Mennonite, you had a specific set of clothes that you wore for church. Like you had like your good church dress, it was called. And it was usually like the really, really plain Mennonites always wore like darker colors and like solid colored fabric. And they were usually longer, like almost ankle length, always homemade dress. They had for the older women, it had what we called a cape. It was just kind of like a triangle piece of extra fabric that actually covered the top of the dress. And then
your boobs.
Yeah. And then you had an apron around. It was another piece of fabric over the front of the dress that just tied or pinned in the back. If you were younger, it was typically tied, and then as you got older, you made your belt short so that you just did it with like straight pins. I stabbed myself in the back with straight pins so many times.
Many times too.
It was terrible. Of course, there's head covering. We called it a cop. I don't know what it's called in English, but it's
basically the head covering. I think we just called it a cop.
Yeah, it's just a white see-through piece of fabric that's sewed into kind of like a bonnet style thing, and it has little white ribbons at the bottom. If you're really plain, you always tied them up snug under your chin, but if you were wild, you let them fly free.
Pin the cop to your head.
Yeah.
The women that were church members wore their cop all the time, but the younger girls and the unbaptized members would only wear it to go to church.
Yep.
And the reason they wear a head covering is because they believe the Bible teaches that women are supposed to have their head covered when they pray, and men are not supposed to. So that's the purpose of women wearing a head covering.
For us slightly fancier Mennonites, we kind of wore printed fabric in like kind of brighter colors, and our dresses were a little bit shorter. Like they were always below the knee, but I would say most of my dresses were probably like,
I'd say about mid-calf, right?
Mid-calf, yeah, probably. And then if they got up to your knee, people would start frowning at you for wearing your dresses too short.
You're getting too wild there. Your dress is getting too short.
For men, they always wore, like, in the winter, they had a black, like, felt hat. It was just like a flat brim hat. Yeah.
And then in the summer, they'd wear the straw hats, and they'd be like a yellow color with the black band on it, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Typically, they wore a solid colored shirt, usually like a light blue or light green or something like that. And then they had homemade pants, usually dark blue or black. And they wore suspenders. They never wore belts. Always had to have a suspender. And then
too worldly to wear belts.
They wore a vest.
Ooh, and clothes couldn't have zippers in it. They had to have buttons.
Oh yeah, yep. You had to have buttons. No zippers allowed.
The men's pants always had buttons on them. They did not have zippers on their pants.
For us that were not quite as plain, we had snaps on ours, I think. Like,
yeah, some dresses had snaps. It was always fun, to go material shopping to look for material for a new dress. We wanted to find one that was kind of fancy, but not such a large print that would be fun. And then there were different occasions too, where we had to wear like solid colored dress. The older women, or the older girls and women, would wear black, while the younger would wear like dark blue.
Oh yeah. Typically that was for like funerals and weddings, and then like any time that there were baptisms or like
communion and church.
Nahmal.
Poshtalk Nahmal.
Yeah. So for those, you'd wear dark blue and black dresses. Also, another thing about Mennonite Church, we only went every 2 weeks. Like, we only went to church every other Sunday. Do you know why it was?
The in-between Sunday, I know, was spent a lot of times like visiting, and I don't know for sure if this is accurate, but I think it was you were kind of, you know, fellowshipping with your neighbors and stuff. You went visiting. Sometimes there were singings. And I don't know if it had anything to do with, you know, they drove a horse and buggy. It took a long time to get to church. I don't know if that had anything to do with it or not.
We only wanted to do it every other week because it took so long. It was such an effort. But yeah, that's a perfect segue into how we got there. We always went to church in like a horse and buggy. And I think it was probably like, probably like 13 miles trip, maybe 10
round
miles.
trip, maybe. I don't think it was that far one way direction.
But it was like uphill. Like we lived
hill. Dirt roads.
Yeah. Unless like the exciting times that we got to take Burris Hollow. The little tiny country road where we drove on.
We called it a little cow path.
Yeah. And when we first moved from Maryland to Kentucky, remember how Dad would make, I think the horse was called Charlie. Do you remember him? Not Charlie.
No. Are you sure it was Bob?
Bob. It was Bob. It was the one that got rickets. But Dad would come down the one hill like really fast, and like it had a sharp curve.
Make the buggy swing.
Wagon slide around the corner. That was the greatest thing ever.
I always remember Dolly, that old draft horse we had. She had a lot of spirit, and I still remember Dad hitching her to the buggy, and she did not want to go to church, so she was rearing up.
I know.
So our church was a very plain building. It was basically just a rectangle, white painted. There was no bell, no steeple, no stained glass windows.
I think it had a chimney on each end.
Yes, for the stoves, because they had to keep warm during the winter. And there was some hard wooden pews, no cushioned benches to sit on. Let me tell you, those things were uncomfortable for that long.
Some of the older women would bring like their own pillows to sit on.
Oh yeah, like cushions and pillows.
Yeah. And then like outside there was like a L-shaped shed basically that was just a series of like hitching posts for the horses where they just put up the shed so that they'd have shelter, like if it was cold or raining or storming or whatever. The horses would have some protection from the weather while they waited on the church services.
Yeah.
And then, like, I think everyone always parked in the same stall, basically. So
yeah, everybody basically had their designated parking.
It wasn't a sign, but like everyone always just did.
This is where you park.
And
we were in a pretty small community, so everybody knew each other, and everybody knew where everybody else was going to park.
Yeah, and you recognize people's horses and buggies, like. They look all the same now, but if you were around it, you would know like every person's horse's name, and you knew like their different, like the differences in their buggies and stuff.
Of course, there were no obvious differences because it couldn't be too different. You couldn't be too fancy. Your harnesses even your horse harnesses had to be plain.
And then like for a bathroom, obviously there was no running water, so we had a really fancy outhouse, I guess. It was like a multi-person outhouse with like stalls in it. It's like the gravel floor, and then like you had stalls with individual pit outhouses.
Everything was made out of plywood, basically.
Yeah.
And the community got together, I think, to build that whenever they built the church. All the men in the community are the ones that built it.
There was no running water, so you had a hand
remember
pump.
That hand pump well?
Yeah, we had one at school too.
Yes.
It was literally like an old metal pump with a handle probably as long as my arm, where you just pump the water out and it would taste like rust and dirt.
Yes, and it had a metal cup attached to it that you drink out of.
I forgot about the metal cup. Oh man, that's like
still taste that, you know.
So many memories. Think about that cup. Wow. I still remember how that would feel on your lips and stuff. We probably drink tetanus out of that thing.
I don't see how we didn't get sick.
I know.
Honestly.
And then like we had separate seating. So if you're a baptized woman, you sat on one side, and then you kind of had like the bench with the preachers in the middle. And then like all the men that were baptized sat on the other side, and then you had the younger boys and the younger girls over on this side. They'd be
kind of over on the other wall.
Yeah.
Girls on one side, boys on the other.
And like you always could tell which one was the men's side because they had the big racks hanging down from the ceiling.
Oh yeah, they hang their hats on because couldn't wear the hats inside.
And like I still remember having to go sit with Dad because I wasn't behaving, and that was like the most embarrassing thing that could happen.
I remember having a meltdown because I had to go sit with Dad. I think it was your fault actually because you were born, and then I had to stop sitting with Mom when I was tiny.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
your spot sitting next to Mom.
Yep, took my spot. Had to go sit on the men's side until I was old enough to go sit with the girls by myself. So yeah, a lot of the younger kids would sit with their parents, like one parent or the other, until they basically learned how to behave and be quiet in church.
Yeah,
for like 3 to 4 hours at a time.
And we'd always have, like, when you were really little, you'd have like your little snack baggie with Cheerios and like little
Smarties
in it.
and when I got older, I'd always take gum along to chew because then I could peel like the little silver backing off the wrapper and make little ghosts and shapes and stuff out of it because we weren't allowed to have toys or entertainment of any kind because we were supposed to be listening to the preaching.
Yeah, and you sit there and like just make little designs.
And I do remember at times, you know, kind of playing quietly with my friends who weren't supposed to, and we had to work and not laughing out loud because we probably would have gotten our butts whooped when we got home.
Yeah. Oh, that was fun. And like every time that when we went down on our knees to say the prayer or whatever, and then we'd be like flicking the gum wrappers across the aisle at the boys.
I don't think I ever did that.
Or we'd like just make faces and stuff and see if we could make someone else laugh.
Yes.
Okay.
The church service itself was a pretty long affair, so that was why we probably didn't pay as much attention as we should have when we were kids.
Oh yeah, I forgot. It was like, what was it, like 3 hours long?
Yeah, it depended on the preacher too, because some of them preached faster, and then the others would kind of on, and it would take forever. Because I guess the preachers took turns doing different parts of the sermon. Like one of them would do a shorter, I guess you'd call it an introduction. And then the other one would do the main part of the sermon.
Like an opening sermon, and then you had like the main sermon, and then you had like a closing. And in between that, we would sing songs. And there's like being a lead singer in the church was always a pretty big deal. Like you had a man that was chosen to be the lead singer, and they'd always like start the singing. And then everybody else would join in. And the singing is different too from what you would hear in, say, an English church. The songs are really slow, and of course they're in German. And the way that I remember it is we were taught that the reason the songs are so slow is because when our ancestors were being persecuted by the Roman Catholic Church for their beliefs, you know, they were put in jail and they weren't allowed to sing songs about their faith. So they'd sing these really slow, drawn out hymns so that the guards wouldn't, I guess, understand, or they were able to sing lower so that they wouldn't hear them. So now we still, and you can actually hear in our introduction a part of that song. Of course, in church, it sounded a lot different because there were so many people singing. It's actually kind of pretty to hear. That's one thing I do miss about church, is hearing everybody sing. How was the bishop structure? Because like every so many communities had one bishop, right? So like we had the bishop from Maryland, and then I think like Pennsylvania had their own. I think so. Our community here in Kentucky, I guess, wasn't big enough to have their own bishop. Okay, so it was like from the size of the community. I didn't remember. I don't really recall anybody being a bishop here. No. I don't know if they just had one from like Pennsylvania and one from Maryland, because that's where the main big communities are. Because I think they only have a certain amount. And then if somebody misbehaved in a different state, those bishops would have to go and straighten them out. Yeah, and they'd come and do visits every now and then, and it was always like a big deal to go to church when the bishop was there, to make sure you heard the bishop. Yep. We had one that we always really liked. His name was Walter from Maryland. Like,
yes, I always love to hear him preach.
I know, I'll never forget what he sounded like.
And one thing that always sticks in my mind is hearing him say the Lord's Prayer during our prayer. I don't know, it just sticks in my mind.
It was almost like a song when he did it. When they needed a new preacher for the church, they'd go through a selection process. Like, basically, how did they choose the ones that got to open the songbooks to find out if they were going to be selected? How did they choose?
I think people put their names in. Okay. Like, they say, oh, this person would be a great preacher. I think that he should be part. And then once, I don't know exactly what the selection process was, but once they had a certain amount of people, they would draw lots to see who the preacher was. Nobody had a calling from God or something. This was just people put their names in. You didn't say, oh, hey, I want to be a preacher, and then you went to school and became a preacher. That's not how that worked.
Right. And then, like, they went through this process where all of the chosen people would sit on a bench and they'd pass around like songbooks, and one songbook had like a slip of paper in it that's like, hey, you've been selected to be our next deacon or whatever.
Yep.
And then when they started out, like, that preacher would be the one that would do the opening service, and then the more experienced preachers would do the whole sermon. And then we also did communion, but we only did it like, what was it?
I think it was like once a year, twice a year.
And then during like communion, we had 2 days of church. We would go to services Saturday and Sunday. And it was Sunday was always a really long service. It's like 4 or 5 hours, right?
Yeah, something like that. And I think they basically went through the whole Bible, right? They preached about it from like the beginning to the birth of Christ, to his death and resurrection.
Yeah.
If I remember correctly.
And we called it Nahmo.
Yeah.
I don't really know what it means in English.
I don't either. I know Saturday was Fashtot because everybody fasted that day.
Yeah. I didn't remember if it was Saturday or Sunday, but it was Fashtot. Everyone would skip breakfast, essentially.
I think it was Saturday.
And this was one of those occasions where everyone would wear like their dark blue and black dresses to go to church too.
Yep, it was a very solemn occasion.
Yeah.
And then I think it was Sunday that everybody would wash each other's feet too.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
As a part of their communion.
Feet washing, all the baptized members washed each other's feet. That was always like weird to me.
Yeah, I would sit there and think, oh, that would be so gross to touch someone else's feet. Now here I am doing worse things.
No, some of those didn't smell very good. But it was something that you did. Same as like the baptized members all greeted each other with like a handshake and a kiss on the cheek.
I don't think it was the kiss on the cheek. I think it was a smack on the lips.
Oh. I always thought it was like a cheek.
It was kind of like to the side, but yeah, because it was a holy kiss, you know.
Yeah.
They thought Christians are supposed to greet each other with a kiss, and that's how they did it. But the men would only kiss the men, and the women would only kiss the women, and they would not kiss an unbaptized member, like somebody that wasn't a member. I guess they'd do a handshake or something.
I forgot about that.
And they don't do it for shunned members either.
And then to be baptized in the Mennonite Church, you basically go through, what was it, a 6-week or 6 church services, so about 12 weeks of classes.
Something like that.
And then for your ceremony, basically they take water. I don't know, like, do they say a prayer over the water? Like, do they bless the water?
I don't remember that part because I only saw a few, I think. The only part I remember is everybody kneeling in front of the church, the ones that were getting baptized, and they'd take the covering off the women's head and they'd just sprinkle a little bit of water on it.
Yeah. And they'd just like sprinkle the water.
Yeah.
There was a specific line that they said afterwards, like when they stand back up. What was the line? I don't know.
They'd take them by the hand and help them stand up and say something, but I don't remember what it was. And I think they had to basically make a vow and saying this is the one true Church of Christ, and they will not go to any other churches and follow any other beliefs or something like that.
Yeah.
It might actually be in one of those books that you have that you got from mom and dad. Might actually be in one of those.
Okay. I didn't remember. And then like after you were baptized, you had to follow the Meidung. Is that what it was called?
Meidung, yeah. Or no, wait, Atnung.
Atnung. I don't remember which one. Either way, one of those words means basically the set of rules which the church goes by. So like you can't have electricity, you can't go to other churches.
Gotta dress the way
yeah, like you had to dress how we talked about earlier. And then if you didn't do those things, you went through a process where you were given opportunities basically to confess in front of the church, repent, and basically apologize for your wrongdoings.
Yeah, and that was called in Dutch it's called trickstel.
Yeah,
which basically means set back. So you were kind of set back from the church, and you were technically still a member, but you didn't get the benefits, I guess, of being a member.
It was like a
mini shunning.
Yeah. And then what?
Isn't that what they call the Meidung?
Oh, maybe, yeah.
The rules you follow was Atning, and if you didn't follow them, you were in the Meidung.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that's right. And then if you didn't correct your behavior, whatever it was that you were doing or not doing, after so many times, like the preachers would come to your house and like talk to you and stuff. If you were a woman, sometimes like the preacher's wife would come and talk to you. Just basically they gave you a lot of opportunities, but if you didn't change your ways, then you went into what was called shunning, which for like the Amish people, I think they're not even allowed to talk to someone that's been shunned, and like from what I know, they're not, basically it's like that person's dead, it doesn't exist. But for us, I think it was a little bit less severe. Like you couldn't do business with someone that was shunned.
You couldn't sit at the same table to eat. And I'm going to share a personal experience I've had with this. We were at and you know, there's ways to get around it. So this kind of expresses that, I guess. We went to my uncle's funeral, I believe it was in Maryland, and they had these folding tables set up from end to end, and to make like one long big table. And me and my dad were sitting at one, and nobody sat at that one table with us, but they would sit on the one that was pushed up right against it to make one long table.
Yeah. So it's like literally following the rules.
Yes, literally.
They technically weren't at the same table.
Yep, technically it wasn't the same table, you know. So I guess it counted. So I guess that's the main thing, is they're not allowed to sit at the same table. Church members aren't allowed to accept anything from shunned members.
Oh, yeah.
So if you like owe a person money and you left the church, you wouldn't be able to pay that money back to them, because that church member would not be able to accept that money from you. Of course, they find loopholes and ways around it.
I was gonna say after like our parents were shunned, they still did business with some of the baptized members of the church, but like they would make us go and like hand the money to them physically.
Oh, and here's another example at the produce auction. My mom goes and buys produce there, but if the auctioneer is Mennonite, he can't accept the bid from her. So me or my daughter has to go along with her and do a bid for her. Basically, they see her nod to me and say, yes, bid on this, and they'll accept that. But if she goes and tries to do it herself, they will not accept that bid. They would just ignore her, flat out ignore her. Which is completely ridiculous, I think. But you know, it is what it is.
One of those loopholes.
Yes.
Mennonite weddings, I only ever went to like one really plain service. I think all the services I went to were people that were still technically in their Rumspringa.
Yes.
So they were at English churches with English preachers. Now, a lot of them wore like plain dresses and stuff to go to that church and be married, but the service was still very much the same as like an English person's wedding. But the plain wedding that I did go to, it was really like another long church service. Honestly, the bride wore like a dark blue dress, and the man was dressed in black, I think.
I went to one plain church service. I think it's the only one I've been to. The only ones I went to, basically, like you said, the young people that were still in the Rumspringa hadn't joined church yet. But the one I did go to, it was basically like a church service. I think the bride wore like a light gray dress, and the groom wore a black suit, basically. Well, I counted for a suit and Mennonite clothes.
It was homemade suit.
Yes. White shirt,
like a hand sewn tuxedo.
And with those young people in Rumspringa, when they went to English churches to have their wedding service, the parents a lot of times could not go to that church because they were not allowed to set foot in an English church.
I forgot about that part. There's a lot of married Mennonites whose parents didn't go to their wedding because they were married at an English church.
Yeah. But they couldn't have gotten married in the Mennonite church because the preachers wouldn't have married them. Right. It wasn't an option unless you joined the church. You were not getting married in a Mennonite church.
Yep. So they actually had no choice but to be married at an English church, honestly.
Right. And then a lot of times they'd have like receptions somewhere else that was not in a church, and then the parents could come to that.
Yeah.
Without getting in trouble.
I think a lot of the really plain parents still didn't, but some of the less strict parents would have the reception like actually at their house or somewhere.
Yeah, that's true.
Reception. So that was a way for them to be a part of it without actually going to the church too.
Right. So they wouldn't be breaking the church rules.
Right. But yeah, for the very plain wedding ceremony, there was, I think, a lot more singing than normal. And like, the service was kind of just like upbeat, and I think they still said vows to each other, right?
I think so. I don't remember that well. It's been so many years ago.
And then like plain funerals are very similar, except literally everyone wears their black clothes. We have a funeral procession, usually from the home of the person or the person's family.
They do a little service in the house, and then everybody goes to the church. There's like they put the casket on a wagon and take it to the church like that, and then there's another graveside service.
Yeah.
Typically there's no singing in those.
Yeah.
Sometimes there is. If the family decides they want to sing a certain song, they will, but for the most part there's no singing.
Yeah. I think the plain funeral processions that I've seen, it was kind of a wild thing to see. Honestly, I say wild is probably the wrong word, but it was kind of astounding, like, because there would be 50, 70 to 100 horses and buggies, like all in a line.
Yep.
And they had like a whole, like they'd have hostlers and stuff to take care of the horses.
Yeah, they'd drive it to the church, and the young teenage boys everybody would get out of the buggy, and the teenage boys would take the horse and buggy to the shed and tie the horses up. And then everybody would file past the casket, which was usually set up outside the church. Everybody would file past it, I guess, basically pay their last respects to the deceased, and then they would begin the service.
Yeah, and then we'd all just kind of stand around in a group by the graveside. Like if you were a close family, you'd be closer to the grave. If you were just like a church member or a distant friend or whatever, you would stay more to the back. I don't think, like, typically people don't really cry at funerals either. It's pretty uncommon.
I did one time hear somebody cry, but this was for a younger person, and I think a lot of it is, they believe they're going to see this person again, that this person is in a better place. So it's not a sad thing for them, it's more sad for us that are left behind here. One question I do get a lot as far as church is concerned is, am I shunned? The answer is no, not technically, because I was never baptized into the church. So therefore, I am not a member of the church. When we turn a certain age, we get to decide whether we're going to be members of the church or not. And that's something we're probably going to talk about in our next episode called Rumspringa. And that'll kind of talk about what our teenage years were like.
Yeah. So we'll cover that in our next episode. But hopefully you've enjoyed this little look into what Mennonite Church is like. It was very different than English church, that's for sure. Something that maybe we didn't mention either. All of our services, everything was in German, like
German. And this was more of, I think we called it High German, because it was more like the actual German language versus the Pennsylvania Dutch.
Like, there was no slang used at all. There were no substitute words. There was no Pennsylvania Dutch. It was straight, like, out of the book German.
Mm-hmm. And we could understand this because we took German lessons in school. A lot of times to learn German, we had to translate the New Testament from German into English and vice versa.
Yep.
So a lot of times we could understand what they were talking about in church, even if they spoke real German, is what I call it.
Mm-hmm. It was the service. It was the services, the sermon, the songs, all of it.
Everything was
German.
German.
Books, our Bibles were all in German. So a lot of people also ask if an English person wanted to be a Mennonite, could they join the church? The answer is yes, they technically can, and the Mennonites would be accepting of it, but it's really hard for an outside person to come in unless you already know German, because again, our services are all in German. So if you're an English-speaking person, it's going to be really hard for you to get anything from the services.
That's what I was going to say, that a non-German speaking person would get nothing out of the service. They couldn't understand anything.
No. So like if you wanted to sit for 3 hours uncomfortable and listen to a language you don't understand, I guess, but
sure, that's fine. Come on
in. But yeah, I mean, if you ask a Mennonite person, they'll always say, yeah, anybody's welcome to our church. And they are. If we had English friends that would stay the night or whatever, they were welcome to come with us to church. It's just they couldn't understand the service.
There were a few times I remember that somebody would bring an English person and they would translate for that person.
Yeah.
But obviously that wouldn't be a long-term solution because it would be too hard for somebody to keep up, just listen to the service and translate.
Right.
And another issue is a lot of people probably would have a hard time going from, having electricity and driving cars to having no electricity, no TV, no radio, and nothing like that, and driving horse and buggy. I think a lot of people would struggle with that.
Yeah. I would struggle now if I went back. Like, I want to drive a horse and buggy, but like I also want to drive to Florida when I want to. So
right.
I do enjoy my TV too, more so than
I could give up my TV if I had to. What I couldn't
have
give
a harder time with like Facebook and stuff.
Yeah, and radio, because I drive so far to work. I think I would have a really hard time giving up music. Then again, I probably wouldn't drive that far to work.
Yeah, you would need your music because you're staying at home. Sometimes people ask me too, like if I could go back if I wanted to, since I'm not shunned. Yes, I could go back to being a Mennonite at any point. Would they accept me? They would probably have some doubts, but yes, ultimately
they would have some serious doubts. But they'd give it a shot. They'd be like, yeah, come on, do it. We'd have to go to classes like we talked about. I'd have to give up my driver's license, probably my nursing job. It would be kind of a sticky situation for me because I'm divorced and they don't believe in that. So that would cause some problems, I believe.
Oh, what would they, like, if you honestly wanted to go back though, like would they hold that against you?
They would let me. I just never could get married ever again.
Oh, true. I forgot that was a rule too.
Well, thank you for tuning in to this episode of exPLAINed. Like our video, comment, let us know what topics you'd like us to talk about next. And tune into our next episode, and we'll talk about Rumspringa.
Woo!
Rumspringa!
You won't want to miss this one.
No, definitely not. We have some stories to tell.
And probably some we won't tell.
Oh, definitely, yeah. For sure.
See you next week.